All right. Well, thanks, folks, for joining. I appreciate it. Danielle and I have put together a great little program for you folks about non-trad. It seems like it's one of the, oh gosh, I want to say one of the most misunderstood areas that we deal with on a normal basis. So we thought we'd take the opportunity for these training sessions to just to hit upon them and hopefully stir up some ideas and definitely go into deeper dives as questions come up, or even from a program level. Once we get into it, I'll show you some examples and we can review it at the school level as well. So we're going to first start off with, let's see here, get my, should be, yeah, never fails when you hit recording, then it never starts. Sorry. There we go. Should be. Has everyone seen the PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Great. All right. So we're going to roughly go over today how we interact with non-trad data as it relates to the Perkins indicators, and also how that relationship is built with the zip code coding that we use at the federal level as well for data reporting. This goes on as a project we've been working on for about, I'm going to say about 4 years now, of really trying to clean up our data and make sure it's aligning to all the federal reportable numbers and stuff. So this is just like another branch of that same activity. And then Danielle, who has probably the most experience on our team from her time with the MOA process, is going to help us by going over how do we go about it, helping to break down those barriers, and what actions can we take to encourage CTE and non-trad participation in our programs. So just as kind of going back to some of our, just the basics, because I know this presentation is really designed at all levels. Just wanted to recap the overall indicators we look at for Perkins. And this is what our CARB report reports out on, in your individual data that comes into your grant systems are all based on these indicators. And the one that we're going to touch upon today the most is going to be looking at 4S1, and that's looking at the level of student participation with non-trad in individual programs, and then at your school level, and then as it rolls up to us at the state level. This indicator for, gosh, I want to say close to 15 years has been up and down as we've been trying to always improve it. And I think we've done a great effort towards it, especially with the latest Perkins, where we actually were able to establish better baselines. And we're now moving in a better direction per school level, where historically before that we looked at it from the state level down, and it was just a challenge for a school, we'll say up in Frenchville, to meet the same requirements as a Portland. So just because of size and scope. So it's a challenge. But now that each school is looked at individually, it makes a bigger difference. And like I said, today we're just going to focus on the non-trad. But as we go through this, and if other directors, after either reviewing this recording or have other questions that come up, we'll be happy to offer the same kind of level of input on any of the other indicators that are challenging to really comprehend because of the how we calculate it. We're going to do a better job at communicating that to you folks, and we'll be doing such this summer. We're rewriting a lot of our data, so it's a little bit more clear. But we're definitely we'll be able to hold any of these kind of training sessions to tackle any of the ones that come up. So as we look at Perkins 5, it is using the very same definition as, I believe, as early as Perkins 2. We measure non-trad by looking at individual program levels, because every one of our programs is a separate career. So that's how the data is broken down, and we look at it from the point of view of not just how many females or males you have in your school, but how it is broken down per program, which allows us to really look at those barriers as an individual level, because the same issues that may hinder a program like auto body may be different than one that's for cosmetology, as an example. So it's very good to have the baseline information be consistent. And historically, I'm not sure where it came from, but historically, people thought it was like a majority percentage, whichever male or female was in a program at the employment level, which dictated what the gender was assigned to the program. But that's not true. It's only at 25%. So if your program, as an example, cosmetology, has a male population in it of, we'll say, 26%, then that would be considered not to be non-trad, because the level of participation at the federal employment level is greater than 25. So we always look at 25 and less as that barrier. And as an example, I'll show later, it's changed quite a bit over the years. So it's a good area to keep focusing on as people change, and we have an opportunity to remove, and more people can see what other programs are available. And through the whole process, and the main reason why this was done, the study was done in the late 70s, if I remember correctly, was to help remove really kind of tracking a student into certain programs based on gender. It was about opening up and providing guidance so students can go to any program they like. It's not based on their gender, it's more based on their personal interests, which I think our locals do a fantastic job at. But as we covered earlier in, I think, the training up in Chimbro, everything stems back to the zip code. So the federal recording has a list of all of our zip codes, and they translate that into what they call SOC codes, which those are based on employment records. And we were educational, so we focus on the zip code. And each one of them are individually done from multiple levels, just based on the different career sets within a certain classification. So that's why it's so important that we continue putting our programs into the correct SIPs, so data is correctly recorded, and you get your most accurate information as it relates to non-trad. I just wanted to, for some folks that may have not attended the Chimbro training, just wanted to highlight one more time the resources in ONET, which is online, and you can search. In this case, the career that I picked as this example was CNA. And you can see our zip code is 51.3902, but the SOC code is 31-1131. So that's the translation, but you can actually search it by words as well, not just by numbers. But this data set on ONET will give you the duties and tasks that are normally associated with those careers. I think it's a good resource to have if you're thinking about setting up a program, to know what kind of equipment you might need, because they list the different sets of skills that are required to do that employment, so which is fantastic. Then it also gives a good list of related careers that are also associated with this. So it's a good resource to have. It's not so much for the non-trad, but I just wanted to highlight it a little bit just because it's a good resource. So when we look at the national codes for our programs, we first start with the NAEP codes that are out there, and we use currently we have, I believe, a 2020 version in the system. So it would look identical to what we're seeing on the screen here. Slightly different format, but ballpark same information. And I highlighted nursing as a great example to demonstrate how there's so many careers just around nursing and why we picked that certain zip code. But you can see as we look through the data set, you can see how the national codes align with which gender is assigned to that program based on the percentage of individuals working in that career. So when we go over and look at the last couple columns, excuse me, you can see there where we actually have the percentages listed out. And you can tell the second one from the bottom, the 513902, when these records were pulled into the system, 11, almost 12% of the industry is male. So this is going to be less than the 25 threshold, which was established. So that's why a male student in the CNA program is listed as non-trad. And I believe that number, I think before this, I think the other version, I think that number was around, oh my gosh, I think it was like 7 or 8. So you can see about every 10 years when they come out the new assignments, our percentages are getting closer and closer together. So that's why it's always important to make sure we maintain that level of accuracy as we go through all of our programs over time. So I wanted to it's always fun to maybe look at the data, but I kind of want to give a real example of how this could impact CTE school here in Maine. And this is based on not changing what's being taught, but just more correctly aligning to the zip code and how it could affect the overall data that you're presenting as we look through this, because we use this data to help establish your baselines. And then also in Perkins, we look at every year to see how are you measuring against that over time. So we definitely want to make sure that we're getting the information correct, and historically we didn't use an approach like this. So I'm hoping that this new data set will help us report things even better than before. So the example I picked was a very typical program that we could have here in Maine. It's a agriculture program, and this one is 01.all zeros. And in the Chimbro training, I mentioned that most times we don't use a zip code like this because it is so broad and doesn't focus on a true career, but more of think of like a cluster of careers that are sort of similar. And they kind of put this as the bucket, and this is the header of that bucket of careers. So that's, as a state, we want to make sure we look at this, make sure we don't actually do this as often. And we've done a lot of cleanup over the years, so there's less and less of these around, but there's still a few more that we have to keep working on. But you can see just from this general description that comes from the ONET site in the zip codes, you can see that this zip code really is talking more about research in the production of it versus actually farming itself, which is important to realize because it is such a general focus. So, but just as an example, we have this program here in Maine, and currently it's set up as it is, and I can show you the difference. So when we look at the actual national federal coding of it, we can see here that females don't count in this situation because they comprise 40, a little over 40% of the overall employment in this industry. Because this industry isn't thinking, this zip code isn't focusing on the what we might consider agriculture as a sense of farming. This is more focused around, as the example they provided, was more like a food scientist or an agriculture scientist. So it has less to do with the actual like crop productions. So this, many people will assume, oh, I got a farming program and I've got 4 females in there, so I'm helping contribute to this non-trad, only to find out when we actually do the calculations, because if we were to use the federal system 100%, this example here, these students wouldn't be counted. And that's why we want to make sure we align as closely as we can. And this is another great example to demonstrate where if a program comes up and neither gender is listed as non-trad, we don't count the program at all. We actually take it out of the equation because it would actually throw off your percentages if we were to count a program as your total count for your school, but yet none of the students inside of it can count. So we eliminate that, and the example I have coming up in a moment will help demonstrate that a little better too. Also, any questions, just go ahead and shout them out too. I apologize, I kind of just go rambling on, so definitely let me know. So here's a program using a zip code of 010304, and reading the definition description of it, you can see it's really talking more about that day-to-day stuff around farming. And it's really talking about crop production. And it's, in our case, probably it would be using the same standards that Emily uses as part of the plant systems. It's using the same information around the equipment that is used and tasks and duties. The only difference is it's more properly aligned to what is being done, which is crop production instead of the research, what the other zip code is more focused on, which is fantastic. So, we know this might be a limitation in this example, which could falter a lot of other ones, but for this example, we can see exactly how it will work out. So when we look at crop productions, and you can see here that females now do count, because when we look at the actual associated careers with this, it is talking about ranchers. It is talking about farmers, that day-to-day job. So they're looking at 24.5% of the industry is made up of females. And here's the importance of looking at this data, because 24.5 means probably when the next series comes out, which would be series 7, which usually is going to come out, sometimes they do it every 5 years, but I think they'll probably do it every 10. This career may be taken off the non-trad list just because it is so close right now. I know this has grown probably about 12%, I think, in the last 25 years, which is fantastic. This just demonstrates that, the barriers that we are removing and allowing, students to select programs they most enjoy. So this is an example where just because the zip codes are different, and this is a better alignment, now they could count the student. And when we actually look at doing the math behind this, so how we calculate, how I calculate 5S1 for the feds is I first start with your overall school enrollment. So let's say for this example here, 243 students. but only 225 of them could be counted because some programs, or in this example, this one program, could not be counted either way. So because they could not be counted as a non-trad, I remove them from the count, and then we work through the equation. I take this new value and other programs that you have at the school, let's say if they had 42 other students who qualified as non-trad, do the calculations, and it comes out to 18.67. And this is a very typical, this is a very typical numbers. And the goal of the school was to come in at 21%. They missed their target by a little bit, but they came in, their target, we always shoot for 90% of the goal or target. If they meet 90% of it, then we say they've met this satisfactory. We definitely always want folks to try to meet at 100%, but we understand that years vary. So that's why the feds allow us to meet at 90%, because they know that, one year you may have a stellar class, or just, in some cases, you just may have a lot more females in that class versus other classes that come in that may help influence this number of non-trad. But this applies to all the numbers, but just in this case. So when we look at this value, we're looking at they achieved the 18.67, but their 90% of their goal was 18.9. This means that this school did not meet this indicator and would probably have to do an improvement plan to say how can they improve to make their indicator. And some of those details will come out when Danielle covers her area, how to help with messaging and how to overcome some of those barriers. But if we look at changing just that zip code to a zip code that is truly better aligned to what the program is teaching, we now see we go from an enrollment of 220 up to 243. We can count all the students now, the 18. And I picked 18 because I think typically most of the CTE programs kind of, max out at 18. So I picked 18 for this example. And I said, well, I kind of guessed at this. I said, well, let's assume you have 2 students for every other session. So then that's how I came up with a total of 4. Run the calculations, they achieve 18.93. And the rest of this data is the same as the other one. All of a sudden, they've now met this indicator just by truly aligning their zip code to the non-trad. Make sure it's hitting the non-trad if it's applicable. So this is a good example of why we do the SIP cleanups, and we are always encouraging CTEs to work with us, and we're more than happy to help review any program. There might be other ones out there that are like this. We want to make sure that we're touching upon those as well. So as we talked, and Dwight, Melissa, and I have worked on this, we're always trying to be more transparent. So my goal next year is to share this information. Originally, I was going to work with Emily and put it on our website, but I forgot that we actually post most of this data as it relates to programming in a different area, where I can include that as part of that data set, so you don't have to go to multiple places to get information. It'll be in one spot. So I've given you the address to where the data will sit. It doesn't actually sit under CTE. It sits under the department's reporting area. And this is what the page will look like. But down here in the bottom, didn't come out very clear, so I blew it up for us to look at. There's 2 different hyperlinks you can choose from. The first one is called SIP list, and this is like our master list for the state of Maine that all schools have chosen to use. And I think there's a ballpark of about 93 to 95 roughly on that list. And then if you want to know what your school actually is approved for, that's the approved schools. The name is a little misleading, and I'm going to work with the data team, see if I can get that fixed for next year, but currently this is what they have. So to look at an example of that, you can see here as we go ahead and improve our reporting, this is what the current list looks like. It has your schools, it has the zip code. Some people like to see the zip code and the name together. Some like it broken up, so I did it both ways. So if you want to search it by name, you can. If you know the number, you can search it by that. Either way you wish. So it makes it a little bit more convenient. So we're going to include that data for non-trad in this list next year. If anybody wants it beforehand, shoot me an email and I could download it from our system and send you a spreadsheet copy of it for now. So just wanted to demonstrate in this one here, if you ever want to use this list to say, hey, how many schools teach culinary arts? Here's an example. You can also sort the data to just get all the schools if you wanted to reach out to someone else. Let's see, Paulette, if you wanted to find out who else out there is teaching culinary arts because you wanted to chat with them about something, you could come to this list and make it pretty quick and easy for you. Joe and I get asked this quite often, and so that's why we want to make sure it's posted out there and folks can always grab that wherever they need it. And this is how we currently are set up in Maine, because we know that, historically this was done some time ago, but this is how it will look very similar to this once it gets put into that spreadsheet with the other data. It will just have a non-trad column and it will have a list like this. And I've actually included the key here to kind of demonstrate what this is. Neutral means that the program doesn't count either way, so it's removed from the counts. Female, F stands for female, that the female is counted as non-trad in that zip code, and male is just the opposite. And the biggest reason why we're moving in this direction is because I honestly can't tell you when this was designed, but I know historically it probably hasn't been kept up on very well, but I'm trying to do it now every year. And we're going to be using the national system. So hopefully within a couple of years, we'll get all of our zip codes aligned, which is the most important thing. And then we can go ahead and do the other cleanups. And then I believe a new data system is coming on board. They're going to probably do a lot of behind the scenes data collection with the feds to actually pull down data. So it doesn't have to be updated manually, which is always the hindrance where someone could type in an error or somebody forgot to do it that year. It's going to eliminate those kind of issues. Because again, it could be like when we did it, whoever did it years ago, they could have made a mistake on some of these zip codes and gender assignments on them. So just as one of the final things I want to demonstrate was just the changes. Like we knew this 01 truly is female, so we've changed that. That's been there for some time, but it could be some programs that we have on our list doesn't exist in the federal system, like the 15.1 doesn't exist in there. That's why we still have the 15.0 because of that. We also know there's the health ox ones that we have in the Maine system. We know that a male is currently assigned as non-trad, but if you look at the federal system, it says it doesn't even know what this is because the zip code is like I mentioned before, kind of like that clustering over holding all the careers that are similar to it. So this is the reason why I want to move in this direction.
Sean, you did have a question from Randy.
Sure.
In the chat, are we going to be doing the full report again this year like last, or is this on a 2-year cycle?
Full report. I'm not sure. Well, that's my last slide anyway. Let me full report. You mean like we do in the I guess I can follow. I'm not sure.
You mean the LNA?
Oh, no, that's I don't believe that's coming up for some time. That's a different, that's to do with the Perkins when we review that. But no, we're not doing, that's when we actually set, like last year or last couple years we've been doing was setting those baselines that we're not doing again until we have to do the other data. And Melissa may have some information on when that would be. But nope, none of that heavy crunching of stuff at this point.
Sean, that I copied down, I thought I copied down that website address, but it brought me to a great resource. It has like student enrollment guides and Synergy uploads, Synergy manual entry. I didn't see that form that you had showed us. And
it's near the bottom, but it is on that same sheet, on the same.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I kind of trying to want to get the whole page, but I think it's near like 3/4 of the way down. If you just type in CTE on that page, hopefully it would bring you to the right spot.
Okay. Thank you.
You're very well. And also, we're going to make these available to you folks after this. So all these hyperlinks in the presentation and will be active. So you should be able to click on them and zip your right out there without any problems too. Except for you, Gloria, we'll charge you extra for that.
I don't blame you. I'm going to owe you many lunches. Oh, I'm a work in progress, right?
Oh,
The power of yet. I will get there.
Any other questions before I turn it over to Danielle? And I'm sorry, Danielle, if I ate up a little bit of your time, I apologize.
It's quite all right. Good information.
All right, I'm all set. Thank you, folks.
All right, so I'm going to reshare the screen here. Hold on just a moment. Can you folks see that? Actually, I'm going to put it over here so I can see. Try that one more time. I apologize. All right. Can you see the PowerPoint?
It's coming, I think. It's a circle. Yep.
We can see it. Okay, you can? Great. So hold on just a minute. I'm going to get to where I've never done sharing a PowerPoint on this particular app. So give me a second to get there. Okay. So Sean has done a phenomenal job of giving you a sense of the numbers. And now I want to talk about kind of how do we practically, what is the practical application? What can we do? What's within our locus of control to attempt to kind of help move these numbers and help recruit more non-traditional students within our spaces and what have you. So we're really going to be talking about encouraging those non-traditional student participation in CTE. And I want to start just by addressing what are some of the barriers. Why is non-traditional? We've been talking about non-traditional careers for about 30 plus years now. So why are they still in existence? What are some of those primary barriers that we see? I'll be honest, this is probably not an exhaustive list, but it is kind of some of the bigger picture items that I see on a regular. And some of those things that may influence what CTE programs our students are choosing. Start with some of those cultural and familial expectations. So what is the culture saying what influences are coming culturally to those students as they're going through that decision-making process, excuse me. So for an example, if a dad is an automotive technician and they have a son that is oftentimes in the garage with them, they may automatically expect that that son's going to follow in their footsteps. But maybe that son has a dream to go into cosmetology, and it would be very hard for them to kind of go against the grain of what that parent expectation is. Or even what those cultural expectations are. You know, a student, for example, that might go into childcare, for example, and early childhood development, may not be as comfortable going into that space if their peers are making fun of them for being in that space. So those cultural expectations, there's familiar expectations that can sometimes influence the decision making that those students are having. Again, we have to assign gender traits and characteristics. So we automatically assume as a culture that females, for example, are better caretakers. So they oftentimes are found within those nursing industry, within those caretaking roles, early childhood development, social work, things along that lines tend to be traditional female. Whereas we oftentimes assign those trades to that male space, right? So there's an expectation that males are grittier than females, for example. They like that hands-on work more than females. And those aren't necessarily truths, but yet our culture has kind of assigned them those truths as truths. It may also be, a lack of exposure to a variety of opportunities. So oftentimes we only know what we know. And if all you've seen is your dad going to that automotive space, then that's all you know, right? So exposing them to more opportunities is a great way for them to kind of explore what the options are. And oftentimes I see CTE exploration programs being a great avenue to be able to provide opportunity for exploration of students so that they can think beyond what they've been exposed to in their past. And really see the full gamut of opportunity that's available to them and in front of them within our CTEs. And then barriers to acceptance. Sometimes I find that the culture within those spaces, those programs, can encourage students that are non-traditional to join in that space, or discourage students that are non-traditional to join in that space. So as we're talking today, we're going to really be talking about how can we set up environments that students that are in those that would be considered non-traditional to want to participate in. So today I'm going to kind of show you a holistic approach to welcoming non-traditionally gendered students into CTE. And when I'm thinking about a holistic approach, it's really looking at all of the individual parts that make up the whole. So I've assigned kind of 4 quadrants that we're going to take a look at, one being culture, one being facilities and equipment, messaging, and leadership. And within each of those different quadrants, there are different ways that we can kind of design that space or lenses that we can look through in order to really ensure that we're considering the non-traditional student as we're thinking about those specific areas. So for example, when you think about culture, and first off, let's define what is culture, right? Culture defines a set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize an instruction or organization. So as we're thinking about the culture of the spaces that students are going to be learning in, we're looking at both the school as a whole that may have one specific culture, and then we're looking at the individual programs. So what's the culture within the space of that program? And there's a couple of things that we can do in order to influence that culture. And one is creating classroom agreements and behavioral norms. So it's important that we as directors and as instructors, that we're kind of setting the tone within that space, what's allowed and what's not allowed, what kind of language is allowed within that space and what's not allowed within that space. And oftentimes I find one of the best ways to be able to do this is to actually do it with your students, to actually ask those students to come up with those behavioral norms at the beginning of the school that we can all agree to. And knowing that that's moving forward, that those will be the expectations. And what I find is when we do it alongside the students, that oftentimes they hold each other more accountable because it's not our list, it's their list, right? So I oftentimes will initiate that process right in the beginning of the school year, and it's something that sometimes I've adjusted it as we move forward through the school year, but oftentimes it's consistent throughout. It's also important we consider the curriculum and the delivery of the curriculum. So for example, not all students learn the same. So if we can use kind of that universal design for learning, that idea that if we present information in a multitude of different ways, that we're more than likely going to be able to connect with each and every one of our students. It might look a little bit different for each student, but at the same time, we're giving them that opportunity to connect with what we're teaching in a variety of different methods. We can also take into consideration kind of the language within the curriculum that we're presenting, and also the imagery within the curriculum we're presenting. So for an example, I have seen a textbook, for example, in hard trades, where it's consistently referring to the students or the workers as he. So as a student, a female student within that trade space is reading through that textbook, they're not seeing themselves within that space because it's consistently excluding them as a female as it's being read to or looked through. Another thought that I like to throw out there is oftentimes within presentations, for example, as I'm developing my presentation, I'm considering the imagery that I'm putting within that presentation. So if I want students to be able to connect to what I'm presenting to them, I want them to see themselves within that space. So if, for example, a non-traditional student is within that medical space, the nursing space, I'll make sure there's images of males within that curriculum, that they're seeing themselves and can identify with the folks that we're presenting to them. Relationship building and mentorship opportunities. And when I say that, I'm thinking about in particular amongst the students. So one of the things that we've come to realize is a sense of belonging. Really, if a student holds a sense of belonging within that space, then they're more apt to be successful within the learning. So by allowing students to create relationships between themselves, to create mentorship opportunities or team learning opportunities, can really help them connect to the other students within that space, to connect to their peers, and really develop those mentorship spaces or those mentorship opportunities. I also find that for a lot of students, being able to put them within a leadership role increases their confidence within that space. And then again, language matters. So how we're referring to students, what we're allowing them to say within that space can certainly influence how they feel within that space. So if we're allowing derogatory terminology to be thrown about, because boys will be boys, for example, and I've heard that a few times, then that can really prevent a female within that space from wanting to join in. Right? Likewise, in, for example, childcare, if you have a group of female students talking about things that a male cannot necessarily relate to, or that might seem a little uncomfortable, make them a little uncomfortable, they may be less likely to participate in that particular space. So it's really important that we consider the language and what's allowed. So facilities and equipment, when we're talking about facilities and equipment and non-traditional, one thing that I immediately go to is personal protective equipment. Now, I personally was somebody who was in a non-traditional space when I was in it, going in for my undergraduate. I did welding, for example, and I did welding for a very short period of time because I found that it was a challenge for me. And one of those challenges was the fact that I didn't have any PPE that actually fit me. So the PPE that I was using created barriers for me as a female within that space. So for example, the gloves that I had to put on were way too big, so I was having to roll up the ends to be able to pull the trigger. The hat that I had, the helmet that I had to put on was way too big and couldn't, as much as I would try and get it to the lowest setting, it still rocked on my head. So I was having to like cock my head as I was trying to weld, which made it very difficult for me to see what I was doing. So personal protective equipment that fits all bodies and all persons is a very easy way for us to say you belong here and that we're thinking about you and we're considering you. Flexible workspaces is important. So for example, you can have workbenches that are multiple heights. You know, I tend to be on the petite side. I'm at 5'1". So if that workstation is designed to meet a 6-foot person and is much higher, then it makes it very difficult for me to access. On the flip side, if they're all really low and I got a 6-foot person looking to utilize that space, then at that point in time, it could create stress on their body if they're consistently hunched over. So kind of having some flexible workspaces or multiple workspaces at different heights can be helpful. Mobility within that, within workspaces, so you can move those workspaces around, can sometimes be a way of including folks. And then also spaces that are both intended for group work versus individual work. So individuals can kind of remove themselves and work independently if need be. This can be really helpful not only for non-traditional, but also for students with disabilities who may need a quiet space to be able to focus. And then also those group spaces where they can really connect with other students and learn from other students as they're going through the process of projects and what have you. Open and clear floor plans. This is something, again, I include oftentimes with more so with the students with disabilities. But as I'm considering the process of this holistic approach, really we can think about it from the perspective and from the lens of any of those diverse groups. So I did throw that in there. Comparable facilities is a big one. So when I do my MOA, the comparable facilities is something that I'm actually looking at. This is a section within the methods of administration that I report on. And what it is referring to is if, for example, a bathroom is allocated for males, then there needs to be a space that is equal to in its offering for females. So if you have a locker room, for example, that's for males and it offers showers and it offers a space for changing and then also some toilets within that space, but then you don't offer that same thing for the females, then you're out of balance, right? So we need to make sure that we're offering those comparable facilities equally. An example would be, I was in a school not so long ago that within their trades spaces, they had multiple male restrooms, some that were unisex or some that were individual stalled, and then some that were multi-stalled. But if you were a female within those trade spaces, you had to actually walk all the way to the other side of the building in order to access a bathroom. So in that case, that says something to that student, right? That they're not necessarily expected to participate in that space. That they're like, what is the message that we're then sending to that female student that wants to be in construction, but yet isn't being considered when we're thinking about our facilities? So in that case, what I encourage the folks to do is that single stall bathroom, make it a unisex. So those female students were able to access a bathroom without having going clear across the campus. Stay away from gender stereotypes in design and signage. So again, we're thinking about kind of the messaging that students are receiving, and we'll talk about messaging in a moment. But for an example, I was going into a program. It was a more trade-oriented program at one point, and one of the first images I walked into was a pinup of a female in a scandalous kind of pose with some of the tools that would typically be utilized within that trade program. As a female going into that space, that automatically says something to me. right? That I'm not being considered within that space. It may not necessarily be a safe space for me. And we don't want our students to automatically be making those assumptions simply because of one image. That instructor had females within their space and they're wonderful with them. But yet the immediate message being sent was one that could potentially deter a female from accessing it. So we want to be very aware of kind of putting those gender stereotypical things up within our classroom spaces. So as we're talking about messaging, again, images and signage in the classroom, we just kind of went through that. We want to think about recruitment materials that we're putting out there into the community. So are we, again, able to see ourselves within those recruitment materials? So if you're a male going into early childhood education, for example, can they see themselves pictured within that space? And our recruitment materials is a really great way of introducing that inclusion, saying, you know what, you belong here. So considering the images as we're putting them out there, considering the language as we're putting it out there is really important. Verbal and nonverbal cues. So how we, for example, body language can say a whole lot about whether I accept you or I don't accept you, right? So taking and acknowledging and recognizing kind of how we're presenting ourselves and the language that we're utilizing within those classroom spaces with our students, again, can change how a student relates to that space. Communication of successes and failures. How we communicate with our students is important. If a student is struggling, it's important that we kind of pull them aside and have that conversation with them independently rather than kind of broadcasting it in the middle of the classroom space. This can be seen also in charts, for example. I've seen charts that are hung up on the wall, and as a student completes tasks, they go through and they check off that chart. And it all kind of creates an automatic participation grade in the process. And that's great in theory. However, that can also create a barrier for a student that might be struggling within that space. It may end up creating some negative thoughts about themselves and how they're progressing through that space. So although the intention is good, at the same time, the impact that it has on a student may not always be positive. So how we communicate those successes and failures is important. Relatable role models. If we can show a student that there are females within construction that are being successful within those spaces in those careers, that's awesome. So if we can have speakers come in, for example, and you know, present themselves that it can be identifiable to those non-traditional students, and that's a great way for us to encourage non-traditional participation. Similarly, we've also, and during recruitment, I've also encouraged folks to include non-traditional students within those recruitment spaces. So if you're doing a career fair, for example, having students with non-traditional students join you so that they can speak to that, you're more likely going to have some non-traditional participants come up and ask them questions. Acknowledgement of student experience. So we always want to make sure that we're aware and we're checking in with students and how you doing and what's going on for you. If they're struggling within that space and they say, you know what, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable, because it's important that we acknowledge that and we recognize that and we have that conversation with them. So not to discount that. Leadership. You as leaders, especially those directors, have a whole lot of influence, as well as instructors have a whole lot of influence. And your leadership can really change the conversation. It can really change kind of the goals within those school spaces. So if you're modeling the behavior of inclusion, then more than likely your instructors will also be modeling that behavior, because that then is kind of being observed as an intended shared value, right? So it's important that you model behavior that you expect from your instructors and then also from the students. Recruitment of educators that may be non-traditional is a great way to encourage non-traditional student participation. So if you can find a female electrical instructor or a male early childhood education instructor, that is a great way to say you belong here and you can be successful here. Relationship with sending schools, it's up to you guys really. I would say the directors have a huge influence in what that relationship is with sending schools. So really kind of setting the tone and making sure that the sending schools recognize the importance of recruitment of all folks and not just necessarily a specific type of student within our spaces. And you guys do that communications with guidance counselors. It might be your assistant director, or it might be your student services coordinator, but it's important the leadership team really kind of hones that value and is then actually placing that value or communicating that value beyond just the walls of the school. Strong vision and mission statement. Again, you guys help to set that tone. And if you have a strong vision and mission statement that really emphasizes inclusion, inclusion of non-traditional, inclusion of any demographic, that can be a great way to kind of set the culture and begin and kind of the undertones of that culture of the school. Goal development and team participation. Within that goal development, I always encourage the inclusion of instructors as you're developing either the vision, the mission, or goals in general, annual goals in general. And if those goals, again, correlate with the concept of we want to increase non-traditional students within our spaces, then the instructors have a voice within that process. And so they're more likely to be able to or to want to participate in the process. And set consistent and reasonable expectations for your instructors and around non-traditional. Non-traditional is one of those things that, again, we've had this conversation for a very long time. So if we expect an immediate turnaround and set goals or expectations that are too high, then that's not necessarily going to be achievable. So we want to make sure that we recognize that there's going to be some slow incremental change. But if we do some of the small low-hanging fruit, or we take care of some of the small low-hanging fruit, for example, changing the imagery, kind of looking at the culture of our spaces, looking at the curriculum that we're offering and how we're delivering it, those types of things, they're low cost. It takes some consideration and some thought processes, but those will help over time to initiate the process of change, right? So setting consistent and reasonable expectations is an important part of the school process. And with that, thank you. Do you have any questions in regards to what I just presented, or questions for Sean that have come up for you since having heard him speak?
I have one.
Sure.
And I don't know if it's for you or Sean. So right now at our school, we're spending a huge amount of money on NOCTI testing, pre and post testing of our students. Is this data that the state needs us to report, or are we doing this just for us?
So Sean's raising his hand, so I'm guessing he has an answer for you.
It's nothing that we collect, so it is for your demonstrating that you're looking at the student's performance, but nothing that we collect or can use. So if you want to internally develop something similar for yourself that you determine that, like, you work with your instructor and they come up with something that's closely related that you feel is effective to demonstrate before and after, absolutely do that yourself and save you the money. I can just, the reason why we went with NOCTI years ago and encourage it was because they're probably the only ones on the the playground at the time that were doing much of that, but definitely
Okay.
you can self-create as well.
Yeah, I have a few instructors who probably use it very well, and then I have others that I honestly don't know that they would even use it at all. And I'm spending about $24,000 a year on that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Thank
there you go. You just use for an hour's worth of labor, you just saved yourself 24,000. There you go.
Yeah, I probably can't do away with all of it, but thank you.
Any other questions before we let you go? I think we're past our hour mark anyhow, so I want to honor you guys' time. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Thanks.